If you're loading whiteboard.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Yes, we can hear you.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning, everyone.
Practitioners.
Morning.
It is 9 o'clock. Good morning, property practitioners, colleagues, stakeholders, and our speakers this morning. My name is Tato Ramaidi. I am the acting chief executive of the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority. And I'd love to welcome everyone who's on this forum this morning. And the purpose of today is to talk about the Bbbee compliance, right? What it is, we're going to unpack what the Bbbee compliance is and how you as a practitioner can become compliant. And colleagues, most of you will know that the PPA, the Property Practitioners Act, came into promulgation on the 1st of February 2022. And for all of you who are FFC holders, which is a tool of trade, know that we implemented this part of the legislation, not wholly, but 50% of it, which was to give you an FFC for 3 years. And the one leg of that was for practitioners who are coming on board to be Bbbee compliant. And that is the basis of our meeting today. And you will know that our mandate rests on 3 pillars as the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority. It is to regulate property practitioners, transform the property sector, and to protect the public's interest. And on these pillars, I am of the view that the transformation leg of it is the one that informed the change of legislation. So when lawmakers sat in cabinet or Cape Town years ago to say, why do we need to repeal the Estate Agency Affairs Act? Transformation was what informed this change of legislation. And since 1976, almost 40 plus years later, we all know that we are still in a sector that is untransformed. And I will only zoom in on the real estate agents. We do have currently over 40,000 property practitioners registered on our database. And of those 40 plus, only 12,000, a little over 12,000 are made up of PDIs or your previously disadvantaged individuals. So colleagues, I think you can agree with me that the sector is still very much untransformed, and it is our duty as the PPRA and stakeholders to ensure that we continue to implement the legislation, and not only that, but the mandate that is set before us, which is to transform our sector. And this morning, I am joined not only by PPRA's colleagues, and on the forum this morning, we have Deborah Viel, who is our complaints manager. I also have Daylin Kambule, who is our legal manager and the acting transformation manager. I also have Lisbeth Kalani, who is our licensing and registrations supervisor. And I also have colleagues from the education team with us today. And our speakers, I have Mr. Chris Dykes, who is the BEE compliance expert, who will be joining us and is one of our speakers this morning. I have Ms. Nicole Ramji, who is the founder of HR Synthesis. And I have Mr. Jan Leroux, who is no stranger to the industry. Mr. Jan Leroux is the chief executive of Rebosa, which is the real estate business owners of South Africa. I also have Mr. Siyam Shide, who is a principal property practitioner in an MPRE, which is a master practitioner in real estate, and he's the chairman of SAIPA. And then last but not least, I've got Ms. Yana Herbst, who is the CEO of Dextra Verification Agency, who will be joining us and taking us through the segments of today's presentation. Now, why are we here and what is the purpose? What is it that we want to discuss here today? And what is the objective that we're trying to fulfill today? We know the status of the property sector and the vision of it to be an inclusive and integrated property sector. I've shared in my opening remarks what is our mandate and the 3 pillars that we stand on. And of course, the promulgation of the Property Practitioners Act, which I spoke of, and the importance of the BEE in the property sector, specifically with respect to the issuing of fidelity fund certificates, which is our tool of trade, and the introduction of the BEE, the property sector codes, and the 6 elements that form the basis of the codes. And this is where our speakers will unpack. And when we conclude, then we will talk on the way forward. So if I can, without further ado, if I can have the speakers flights or turn on the cameras so the practitioners can see who they are, and in no particular order, but Daylin Kambule, as the speakers are flighting their cameras, or they're turning their camera on, I will then invite Daylin Kambule, our acting transformation fund manager, who will then take us through the BEE, the PPRA, and the fidelity fund certificate. So Daylin, if you can please come in. Thank you. And colleagues, just a few housekeeping rules. There is a chat box where we will be taking questions as our presenters and our speakers What we'll do is we will take all questions at the end after the final speaker has given their presentation. And for those questions that we may, for whatever reason, because I know there are time constraints, we will then collate them and we will share on our platform. But I will work swiftly to ensure that we do get through all the questions that at the end of the presentation, as well as in the chat box. Thank you, Daylin. Please come in.
Can we have the others muted? Sorry, colleagues. have the others muted. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much. I am just struggling. I'm just. Lady, can you assist us to mute everyone, please?
Hoe kry ek die begin van die begin?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry about my camera. I'm just struggling to show my camera, and I have the IT department assisting me. But in order not to delay, I will definitely go straight to the presentation. And thank you, CEO. I will be speaking on the PPA and the PRA. I'll look at the FFC. I'll then speak to the disqualification as well as the validity of the BE certificate. If you can remember, the Property Practitioners Act came into effect on
Just go back to the webinar.
February 2022. And with it coming into effect, it ushered the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority as the governing body responsible for implementing the Act. So we
Now I can't hear it, Terence. I don't have any.
can we mute Naledi, are you able to mute
Can you
everyone?
just double check for me that I-
All right, thank you so much, Naledi, for that. Colleagues, thank you so much. I think I will go right back to my presentation. My presentation just started with looking at when the Property Practitioner Act came into effect, which is on the 1st of February 2022. And we know that with the Act coming into place, it ushered in the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority as the governing body that was responsible for implementing the Act. We know that the Act itself brought a number of significant changes to the property sector. And some of these major changes included the fact that it broadened the scope of its application by consolidating all role players in the property sector under the Act or under its ambit. And just in terms of the PPRA itself, the role of the PPRA was also enhanced with key responsibilities, including regulating the property practitioners and dealing with consumers, and also ensuring compliance with the Act. Also, it was also entrusted with the responsibility of educating, training, and developing of property practitioners, as well as transforming the property sector in order to achieve inclusivity, especially for the previously disadvantaged individuals. And when we look at the FFC, what the Act did, it introduced a 3-year Fidelity Fund certificate, which was another significant change. And it also made it mandatory for each and every property practitioner, whether juristic or natural person in the sector, to hold a valid FFC when operating. I think what it went on to do is that it went on to specifically state that persons who operated outside complying with the FFC were then barred from earning a commission, to the extent that even conveyancers have been barred from making a payment to property practitioners that are not in possession of a valid Fidelity Fund certificate. It's clear then that the Act has imposed tighter levels of regulation on the industry, and with that, it had also given the PPA extensive powers to ensure that it can successfully implement the objectives of the Act. When we look at Section 50, subsection A, Roman figure 10. This refers to the disqualification, and these are some of the powers that have been given to the PPRA, which includes the power to refuse to issue an FFC to any person who is disqualified in terms of that subsection. So colleagues, I think we are gathered here today to discuss the requirement for a valid BE certificate as a prerequisite for the PPRA to issue you with an FFC, either as a new applicant or as part of the process of renewing an FFC. So it's important, I think, for the PPRA to state that it will not issue an FFC unless your application is accompanied by a compliant BE certificate. And the accepted level of compliance, for example, is between 40 points, which is your level 8. So if you score anything below 40, and if your BE certificate is non-compliant, then will not be able to issue you with an FFC. I think there will be a presenter here that will take us in detail as to explain what is a compliant BE certificate as well as the levels. In terms of BE certificate, what the Act has also done, it has granted exemptions under Regulation 41.20, which provides that natural persons will be deemed upon application of an FFC to have been exempted from compliance with that section 50 that I quoted below. So when it comes to the validity of a BE certificate, what is going to be crucial is that the certificate must be valid for a period of 12 months. It's also important to note that the certificate itself must be valid for the financial year in which the firm was rated. Importantly, we should also note that it's only directors and members of entities that are allowed to apply for a BE certificate. And further, a BE certificate must be generated by a BEE verification company or one that is verified or accredited by SENES. So we'll also be able to learn more about how we can verify that the agency is a registered or a verification agency. So we can also verify the agency that we are using to generate our BE certificate by going onto the SENES website and follow the steps that are in there on the website, and we'll be able to get whether that agency is accredited. So thank you so much, Program Director. I think for me, that is my presentation. Just to be clear, the PPRA will only be renewing an FFC if you have a valid triple BE certificate. Thank you, Program Director. Over to you.
Thank you for that presentation, Deli, and sorry for the silence, colleagues. I was too muted as well because of our colleagues who were talking earlier. And just to clarify, property practitioners and colleagues, the FFC renewal time period obviously is not up until the next 2025, right? So there is still ample time where practitioners can still be able to be compliant before they can come in and renew. So we are not here to force you to renew tomorrow, and hence the timing of this webinar, so that we give you ample time to ensure that When such a time comes for the renewal, you are compliant. Next on our list of speakers is Mr. Jan Leroux to give an industry perspective. Mr. Leroux, if you can please come on through. Naledi, if you can please unmute Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. I think I'm unmuted. I trust you
Yes.
can hear me. Right.
Yes.
Thanks in that case for the opportunity to participate. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Jan Leroux from Reboza. And I'm glad there are so many experts on the panel today to actually answer the questions. I'll learn from them as well. As we all know, transformation is important. And contrary to what some people have indicated, the industry is by and large very positive about this. There are a few exceptional people that may be objecting, but by and large, I have not come across anyone who does not want to see it happen. As stated earlier by the acting CEO, of course, the percentages are very low still, below 30% for employees and below 20% for principals. It's because of this need on the principal side that Reboza has introduced the Reboza Business Leader Program to train Black participants to become business owners, which is going very well. And I'm raising it now because it's one of the many ways in which state agencies can, of course, obtain some points towards this BE certificate. I think something that must be noted from the real estate industry, which I've often muted, but I don't think it's generally understood or accepted. And that is, there's a misconception that the so-called big national brands are dominating the market, whereas the small ones, smaller ones, of course, they don't. The contrary, however, is true, and I'll explain later why that is important. About 35% of the market goes to big national brands that you will all recognize with multiple offices. More than 60%, close to 65%, are actually done by the smaller firms, which you can call one-man bands, mom-and-pop shops, etc. And I'm raising that because I think there was not enough homework done from the industry perspective when this was put into place. The bigger firms can much more easily address the BEE challenges because a big firm, like any other national group, wants to grow more and more, will always have more opportunities to employ people and so forth. Whereas the smaller firms would be, and I'm using mom and pop as an example, only employ themselves and a daughter and a son or one or two other people. It's a small firm and they only want to work in their area and probably from home. So one must try and keep in mind that 65% of the market are those small firms. You can also get to this number by taking the 40,000 agents that the CEO mentioned and divide it by about 6,000 firms. It gives you just over 6 people per average per firm. So small firms is the name of the game, and I'm raising that. So I'd like to hear from the colleagues on the panel today how such a small firm, 65% of the market, can manage to achieve the necessary points, which I think is a challenge. Also, unlike a bank that wants to get transformation in place, they can favor the appointment of Black people, period, because they employ so many people. But 65% of our market is actually people that are self-employed. They employ themselves. It's not somebody else that can tell them they can work there or not. So those all raise challenges, which I hope the panel can help me with. As to the BE certificates, it was, of course, at a huge expense. If you think about it, happened more than a year ago, the first round, and that cost industry between 40 and 50 million rand. And of course, from an industry perspective, we are asking, was that worth the while? Did it serve a purpose? What happened to the data accumulated? Has it changed anything? Did it move the dial in any way? Was there not maybe a more cost-effective way of achieving that? You know, if you're talking 40, 50 million, I'd rather would have seen that deposited into the transformation fund to really make a difference. But I look forward to some answers in this regard. Then I do have a serious question. Deli, the previous speaker, mentioned that you must score a minimum of 40 points being a valid FFC. That is not our information. The previous chairman of the board and several colleagues at the board has assured me over many months and years that a certificate is valid if it's issued by a proper accredited verification company registered with SANAS, and that there's no minimum score required. And I think that's also proven by the fact that out of the 6,000 certificates that were issued last year, I want to guess close to 3,000-4,000 would have been way below the 40-point mark. In other words, the authority has issued certificates without BE certificates, the people qualifying with more than 40 points. So our information was that it was more a collection of information and that there was no minimum requirement. So I look forward to more information in this regard. So from my side, once again, thanks very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jan. And I'm sure that as we go along, some of your questions may be answered. Otherwise, we will answer them at the end of our discussion. But thank you for your presentation and just giving your perspective. And colleagues and practitioners, next up, we've got Mr. Siya. He is the chairman of SAYIPA. So SAYIPA is a dynamic organization that is dedicated to transforming the property sector in South Africa by accelerating the active participation of young people in the real estate industry. So I think it's always important when we are having these conversations, especially around transformation, that we involve the youth, because they are the future of the property sector. So without further ado, Siya, can you please come on board, switch on your camera, and engage us on what does it mean to be youth in property? Thank you, Siya. Naledi, if you can just assist by also unmuting Siya, please.
I think he got kicked out. Let me check again. I did unmute him. Let me check again, Sia.
If I may, so that we don't lose track of time, please do, whilst we wait for Siya, I think I can switch the program just a little bit and introduce Mr. Chris Dykes. I did introduce him in my opening remarks. And Chris is the founder of Infinity Learning, a consultancy that assists corporates with BEE and growth strategies, amongst others. So Chris, if you can please come in, and then I will have Siya join us after you. So Laledi, if you can just unmute Chris so that he can take us through his presentation, which is around BEE and the property sector codes. Thank you.
Thanks, Program Director, and certainly it's a privilege to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. So my role today is just to introduce the BEE codes to you and talk about some of the key principles that underline and underpin the codes. So just as a starting point, I like to compare the verification process with writing an exam, you know, having a metaphor as such. And one of the first things in the exam structure is to recognize that in many exams, there are different levels. So in the old matric exam, we had lower grade, standard grade, and higher grade. And in the BEE context, what we have is something similar, where there is what's called an EME, a QSE, or a generic company. So the EME is effectively the exempt micro enterprise, and by the name of the business, or by the name of exempt, you are exempted from doing BEE. The QSE is referred to as a qualifying small enterprise, and the generic business is simply generic. And what that means is that businesses that are below a certain threshold, and we'll discuss that in a second, are exempted from doing BEE. QSE companies have to comply with the codes, but the requirements are not as high as the generic codes, and then the generic codes themselves are representing the highest level, of course. So in the property industry, we have different types of businesses, and from a description, we have asset-based companies, service-based companies, and then estate agencies, broking companies, and so on. And the levels that have been set for asset-based companies is any business less than 80 million Rand falls into the EME category. In a service-based companies, any business that a turnover of less than 10 million Rand is defined as a QSE, and companies in the estate agency space with a turnover of less than 2.5 million Rand are QSEs. Qualifying small enterprises are then 400 million Rand, 50 million Rand, and 35 million Rand, respectively. Businesses higher than that threshold are then categorized as generic businesses. The second thing to keep in mind, or to look at using our analogy of writing a matric exam, is that there are a number of questions that have to be answered. And each of these questions has a different number of marks, or in this instance, points, that are awarded. So the 6 questions, or the 6 elements existed in the property sector charter, is the ownership, or the property sector codes, is ownership, management control, skills development, enterprise and supply development, socioeconomic development, and enterprise development. And just as a heads up, the reason that enterprise development has a line through it is, given the structure of the property industry, there are certain businesses that are excluded from having to comply with economic development, given the nature of their businesses. And you'll see that we have given an indication of the different points that are allocated depending if a company is a QSE or a generic business. So just in terms of simple definitions, ownership obviously refers to the ownership structures of the company. Management control refers to the employment equity within the business and the people that are employed within the business. Skills represents training, of course. Enterprise and supply development, ESD, is of course looking at small business. Socioeconomic development looks at social development, and economic development looks at investment. So just to go into a little bit more detail, and this is referring to that point around the validity of companies and the level of compliance that they have. Once again, referring to the exam metaphor, the pass mark effectively in BEE is 40 points. So any business with a contribution level of, who has earned 40 points or more is recognized as a level 8 contributor. Companies that have earned 55 points or more are level 7 contributors, and so on, all the way up to a level 1 contributor, which represents 100 points. What does this actually mean for you as a business? Well, this links to something called the recognition level. And effectively, this is the value that you offer to your customers. So a level 8 contributor has a 10% recognition level. A level 1 contributor has 135% recognition level. And so let's just imagine a situation where you are either buying goods and services, or you are selling goods and services into one of your customers, and you have an invoice of, let's say, 1,000 Rand. A level 8 contributor multiplies that 10% recognition level to get what I like to call B bucks. So in this instance, you would earn 100 B bucks from your client, or you are offering 100 clients. So you're offering 100 points to your client, or earning 100 B bucks from your supplier. and all the way through to a level 1 contributor where you would multiply that spend by 135%. And obviously, all of the different contribution levels have the different recognition levels. The key thing to keep in mind, though, is something called the discounting principle. And how the discounting principle works is it defines 3 key elements, and the elements are ownership, skills development, and enterprise and supply development as more important questions, or as in this instance, priority questions. For generic companies, all 3 of these elements apply. For a QSE company, the ownership applies, and then either skills development and or enterprise and supply development. So companies have a choice as to what they would like to focus on. And a sub minimum has been set as 40% of the target that has been identified. And should a business not achieve that sub minimum point, they get discounted down a level. So an example in this case would be a business that is a level 8 contributor, but in this instance doesn't have enough ownership in their business. They would then get discounted down from a level 8 into a non-compliant certificate. And so for that, in that context, that business would need to work on the other elements of the codes to ensure that they get to a level 7 contribution, which would then get discounted down to a level 8. So this is obviously a very, very important consideration as part of your BEE strategy. So just to look at a couple of the key aspects of the codes, and what we're going to be focusing on today is what we refer to as the time-based elements of the codes. So what does that mean? Well, if we take enterprise and supply development, if we take skills, and we take socioeconomic development, all of these elements have to have their initiatives implemented within a financial year. So if, for example, you were to underspend on, let's say, enterprise and supply development or on skills, and you would recognize that you haven't achieved enough points to get to a certain level, you can't make up the points at a later time after your financial year end has finished. In the past, that used to be possible, but it is no longer an option. So just for today, we're going to do a very, very brief synopsis on ESD, Enterprise and Supply Development, SED, and skills. Depending on if there is a need or not, and there's enough people asking for it, we can certainly look at the possibility of going into more of a deep dive at a later point in time. So if we look at the procurement table, and what's important here is just to emphasize that within enterprise and supply development, procurement and the development for small enterprise is integrated. And we have a table that just shows how the points are earned depending on whether you are an EME or a QSE. And what's important to recognize here is that it is possible to earn points from one supplier in multiple categories. And so let's imagine that you have a supplier, or you are a supplier for that matter, and you have a minimum 51% Black ownership, and you are a QSE, and of course you are either procuring or part of the procurement. In this instance, your role as a supplier or as a client would apply at 3 different levels. The example, again, just to reinforce what we were saying earlier about the different levels and how this contributes into the procurement perspective, is somebody at level 8 spending 1,000 Rand gets 100 Rand recognition, which in turn is linked to the table that we've just shown you now. Okay, so the next thing to keep in mind within procurement is that it is possible to earn a number of bonus points. And the first bonus points are earned where spend is on designated group suppliers. And in this instance, hopefully we'll still be able to hear from Sia today. If you're procuring from Black-owned businesses, that is where there are bonus points available. Second of all, there's a bonus points available, or a bonus point available for businesses that graduate one or more enterprise development beneficiaries to a supplier development level. So in the example here is you are involved in a generic program with a number of different entrepreneurs that you don't necessarily have a relationship with, but you're helping these businesses to become more stable with training or whatever the case may be. And one or two individuals stand out, one or two businesses are exceptional in terms of how hungry they are, in terms of the service and the value that they can offer to you. And you were to bring that individual into your supply chain. And by definition, that involves that they would issue with invoices and so on. That graduation represents the possibility of earning a bonus point. The third possibility of earning a bonus point is where jobs are created. And obviously that is a priority in the industry. So just a couple of easy wins is just to recognize that every single rand that you spend has a BEE value. Critically look at all support services that you are engaging with. So your cell phones, your stationery, your printing, cleaning, etc. And lastly, look at training companies that you are working with in your supplier development spend. And just as an example, Charter Academy, who is part of this presentation, is a level 1 BEE certificate. So any spend that you were to allocate with them, as an example, would earn 135% of that training spend that would allocate directly to your procurement targets. So moving now quickly to supplier development and enterprise development. The essence of this aspect of the BEE codes is recognizing the importance of small business development, but differentiating between those individuals that you are working with directly and those individuals or businesses that form part of the bigger ecosystem. And the key thing to keep in mind is that the target spend that we're looking at is a percentage of net profit after tax. And obviously, in this instance, a generic company would have a target of 2% of net profit after tax in supplier development and 1% of net profit after tax in enterprise development. So what we've done is just added a list of examples of what is possible in the supplier and enterprise development space, but perhaps just to use a practical example. Let's imagine that you as an estate agent are working with a business that is either photographing homes or helping to prepare homes for viewing. It might be that you work with a business that forms part of your supplier program, where you are offering, let's say, training on how to take better quality photographs or how to Photoshop the photos so that you are showing the house in the best possible way. And that person then becomes part of your strategic value proposition. And perhaps just reinforcing this, one of the key questions that is critical within the BEE space is to continually be asking yourself, what is your return on investment? So let's say you're spending 10,000 Rand on a supplier. Well, what are you getting back in return? How is this business helping you to become more competitive, a higher value add, and so on? And the same principle applies within skills. If you're spending a budget on a learnership program, for example, how is that learnership program having an impact on the functioning of your business? So let's move quickly to socioeconomic development. And socioeconomic development refers to any spend that is shifting the transformation, the growth of a wider community. So investing in education, for example, is one of the key needs in the economy. And in this example, the same thing applies. Your compliance target is based on a net profit after tax calculation, and this applies for QSE and generic companies. And 2 points are earned from this section. So again, there's a number of different examples of what is possible in this space. But if I can share an example of something that happened last year in one of the programs that we ran, we were working with a number of schools and the governance in those schools and the management in the schools, and then in turn working with some of the students in these schools, helping them with study skills and that type of thing. And one of the students that we were working with graduated with 6 distinctions last year. Now, it's an astonishing achievement because this young lady, you know, her mum is unemployed, her dad works in the gardening space, and really this is the kind of thing that BEE envisages. And what's really exciting is that the company that helped to sponsor this particular program has now brought this lady into their mix and has recognized that she, over the next 10 to 15 years, assuming that she stays that long, and certainly, obviously, you know, things are flexible, but she represents the potential of a real deep investment in this individual with a real long-term focus on having an asset within the business. And so the same thing would be true for you know, yourselves, and looking at potential sales agents, looking at potential finance people that would help you in your business. Now, I know that Nicole was supposed to be presenting this section, and there seems to have been a bit of a tech issue where she was kicked out of the webinar, unfortunately, and has been struggling to rejoin. So I will just step into her place and just briefly speak about the skills development element. So the key thing to keep in mind here is that the skills element is broken into 3 primary areas. The first is all skills development expenditure on any program specified in the learning program matrix as a percentage of the leviable amount. So what does this mean? Well, the first thing, of course, is that expenditure is obvious. The learning program matrix, which I will show to you in a couple of seconds, defines different types of learning. And as a percentage of the leviable amount, the leviable amount is the amount that you spend on your salary bill, your wage bill. And so in this instance, full compliance that would earn the maximum points would be 5% of your leviable amount to earn the 8 points that is available in this section. I've just seen a message that Nicole is here. Can I just confirm if that is okay? So I don't see that she's in, but let me just carry on. So the second thing to keep in mind is that points are allocated to people with disabilities. And, you know, this is such an important part of our social structure that people with disabilities are integrated into work and entrepreneurial opportunities. So this is certainly for me one of the most exciting aspects of the codes. Please, guys, be aware of the difference between generic and QSE businesses. Again, where the emphasis needs to be and what we are focusing on. So the second part of the SD framework is recognizing the importance of learnerships, apprenticeships, and internships as a percentage of total employees. And in this instance, the key thing to keep in mind is that it's important to recognize that the learnerships are not only for actual employees, but are also relevant to people that are currently unemployed. So again, when we start talking about return on investment and the role that BEE plays in the overall growth of the business, this is such an amazing opportunity to really explore where opportunity applies. And so hopefully we'll talk with Sia in a couple of minutes about youth. But in talking to him the other day, we were just talking about how youth represents such a large component of the industry, and how over the next 10 to 20 years, this youth element is going to represent probably one of the biggest aspects of our businesses going forward. And so bringing youth into the mix that has particular tech and communication savvy and so on really offers a great opportunity. So the last thing to keep in mind here is that bonus points can be earned from absorption. And what is absorption? Absorption is the number of people that are employed as a result of your programs. And in this particular instance, to be absorbed, a person would have had to be in a learning program for a minimum of 6 months and employed for 12 months. So once again, we will go into more detail as necessary, but keep in mind that there are really important issues that define how you drive your BE strategy and your compliance strategy going forward. So just quickly to look at the essence of the skills development points, where they're earned, and recognizing again that skills development is a priority element. This is the learning program matrix, and you can see the different types of learning that is possible. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on it now, but just to emphasize that category F and G programs, which are informal programs, are capped at a maximum 15% of your overall space. Okay, so just a couple of key points. We've spoken about the different targets that are applicable, but maybe just to recognize that there is a focus on Black women. Use the learning program matrix to define where you're going. Continuous professional development, or CPD, is critical. And in this instance, there is a target that is necessary. So please don't lose sight of that in the structure of your program. We've spoken about absorption, and we've spoken about the bonus points. Lastly, guys, just please keep in mind that with regard to skills, you need to submit workplace skills plans or annual training reports if you are above a certain threshold. And these submissions need to be made in time, because if they're not made in time, it will compromise your ability to go through the verification process. Just as a last point regarding the skills, please note that the 1% skills levy that is payable, depending on the circumstances of your business, needs to be paid over and above the target on the skills element. But the really good news is that that 1% can be used to augment your training budget. So in this particular instance, about 70% of the grant money is available to you to get back. 20% as a mandatory grant and 49.5% as a discretionary grant. What does that mean? It means that, assuming that it's worth your time, you put an application into your CETA, depending on what you're wanting to do, to get this money back, which you can then use to supplement your training. Okay, so we won't go into too much detail here around how to tap into the CETA funding, but just please recognize that it is possible to get this money back and to make it an integral part of your strategy. So a couple of quick ones: make sure you're registered with your correct CETA. Make sure that your skills levy is payable, assuming that you need to. If you have more than 50 employees, a training committee is important. That training committee needs to meet on a quarterly basis, and that your training is QTCO accredited. Okay, so that is me for now. I'm going to hand over to Jana, who will take us through how the verification process works. And obviously, this is important for you thinking about and planning for your process over the next couple of months. Thank you.
extensive and detailed presentation. Yana, are you unmuted?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. But
Okay.
just let me introduce you. So, colleagues, Ms. Yana Herbst is the CEO of Dextra Verification Agency, right? So, what does Dextra do? They do obviously generic verifications. So, for companies with a turnover of 50 million rand an annum and more, they do qualifying small enterprise verifications. So, the QSEs that Chris was talking to, and then also companies with a turnover between 10 million and 50 million rand an annum. And of course, their expertise is BEE training, but that is Dextra in a nutshell. Yana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate and be part of this as well. Okay, we are, the name of the company is Dextra. We are a SANAS accredited agency since 2016. And I'm just going to share with you quickly the verification process and the steps that you need to follow in short in order to become verified by our agency. So first of all, we will receive a request form from you, which you can apply for. We will actually base a quote on the information as indicated in that request form. The quote is based on your turnover, your total number of employees. We get some other information, the entity's name, registration number, that number, and so forth. We will forward you the quote. You can accept the quote. After acceptance of the quote, we will forward you an engagement pack. In that engagement pack, the whole verification process will be detailed and listed for you to follow. There will also be an agreement that needs to be signed between both parties. And we agree on price, on location, dates, and so forth in terms of on-site verification and so forth. We will request documents, evidence from the measured entity to be verified. You can either submit this in person or you can email it to us or via Dropbox or whatever is convenient for you. After that, we will schedule an on-site date between the measured entity and the verification agency. So an analyst will be appointed. Once we agreed on a date, we will also forward you the names of employees and so forth that needs to be interviewed according to a sampling procedure. And during the on-site visit, we will basically conduct the interviews. We will get the last of the documents to be verified and so forth. Okay, all of this, the whole process will be explained in the engagement pack, or you consult one of our analysts to assist you with this. After we conducted the on-site verification, there will be a file prep. The file will be prepared for sign-off by the technical signatory. We will check all the validations, the evidence, the documents, whether all payments were made in time, and so forth. And after that, the file will be signed off, after which the certificate will be issued. The time frame for all of this all depends very much on, submission of evidence and so forth. So we can verify and complete this whole process within, say, a week.
Hi, you are breaking. Yana, it's breaking. I don't know, maybe it's the network or.
Seem to have lost Yana. Perhaps we should just introduce Sia quickly, and we can try and get the connection with Yana back. Sia, are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. I was just waiting for the introduction. Thank you very much. Can I just dwell in? Am I audible, guys?
Yeah, we had introduced you earlier, so everyone on the forum knows who you are and what SAILIPA stands for, and that you are here advocating for youth. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. And apologies for the technical glitches there and there. Firstly, I would like to thank you guys for the opportunity, more especially being the young guy and being in the real estate and having this platform to express the overview of youth and property. So thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Siyabonga Mshibe. I'm a property practitioner and also a chairman at South African Youth in Property Association, which is an organization that is dedicated in accelerating transformation within the real estate sector. We realize as we stretch ourselves and strive for bigger and better achievements that it is extremely important we understand it's not only ourselves or the here and now, but rather it's about creating a better country and a greater prosperity and growth for our South African economy. Economic empowerment is central to South Africa, overcoming youth unemployment, poverty, and improving the well-being of South Africans. Therefore, when we speak of transformation, young people should be the center of the conversation, given the fact that they will drive the future of the economy, sector, and country at large. As young people enter into the real estate market, we fairly look up into our predecessors, those who have made a significant mark in real estate. It then tells us that it's actually a lucrative sector, and we as young people are driven, motivated, and firmly believe we are the future. We are a tech-driven generation, which then provides efficiency in our efficiency and convenience in our business model, placing us young people at the better place to actually be in demand in the market. I mean, we have seen the likes of virtual agents and how photographer improved how we see properties using the drones and other models that are currently available in the market. Also looking at how young people use social media influence and trends, understanding very well that different social media platforms offer different audience. It's not just a one size fit all. In all these innovative activities, best believe me that they are all driven by the youth. This then speaks of the entrepreneurship spirit and momentum young people have and we would like to see more young businesses in real estate emerging, digitalizing on how we trade and traditional way of doing things, just only simplifying and making things much more convenient for everyone. I best believe that this model of transformation will give young people a sense of responsibility and the youth can make meaningful contribution towards our sector. It is very important for all of us to work together to achieve this common goal of transformation. We can never talk of transformation outside young people, and none of us acting alone can achieve the kind of successful impact we desire. But we rather need support from all the participants in the industry. With that being said, I would like to thank you and urge all the participants within the real estate sector to support and carry young people. We have a pool of young people that are motivated, that are hungry to learn, looking for opportunities. And I would like to just in closing to say that we actually need the industry to hold our hands for the better of our country. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sia. And I'm also inclined to agree that we cannot talk about transformation without involving the youth. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we close, I would just like to bring in Chris Dykes again so that he can tell us about the way forward. And then we will open it up to the floor. I saw some questions that have been streaming in our chat box. But before we entertain those questions, if Chris can come in and tell us about what is the way forward, now that we've heard what it is to be be compliant, the steps on how to get a B certificate. What is the strategic framework around our topic today? Chris, please come in.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so what we've done is just created a 12-point plan around some key steps that you can look at as part of building your strategy to ensuring that your BEE process is a success. So the first thing that is really, really, really important is to conduct a gap analysis. And this is where you have the opportunity to figure out what you currently have in place, understand who your suppliers are, understand what training you're already doing, understanding the employees that you have in your organization, and understand your ownership structure, understand who you have as suppliers that you can build and grow with, etc. And from this base, you plan a point strategy to achieve the goal contribution level. And this is where we spoke about, is it a level 8, is it a level 7, or are you even aspiring to have a higher level that impacts on your level of competitiveness? From there, we need to understand what your key deadlines are. So for example, in April, the submission of your workplace skills plan and your annual training report. Any other key deadlines that are critical need to be mapped and ensure that the submission is a success. The fourth point refers to that issue of understanding your return on investment, your strategic drivers, your objectives, and so on. So the key there being who are the people that you are wanting to develop? What are the skills that you're wanting to develop? Who are the partners that you're working with in your business that are going to give you that competitive edge and going to be part of your growth framework? At this point, the suggestion is that you appoint a verification agency as a strategic partner. Now, what's really important is that agency cannot operate in the context of a consultant to your business, but they can certainly help you with the types of documents that are going to be required, and whether certain programs are going to meet the requirements of the verification process. The second thing in terms of appointing partners is to look at the possibility of working with collaboration, people that specialize as skills development facilitators. For example, Nicole, enterprise and supply development partners, socioeconomic development partners, and so on. And the key thing to keep in mind here is that if we take SED, for example, there are people that have extensive networks with schools or universities, for example, that are able to tap into the high-performing individuals that would really complement your team going forward. They also have structures in place that ensure that the money that you're spending is optimized. The second aspect of our strategy is that we need to look at the specifics now of engaging in learnerships for employees and unemployed people. Without a doubt, this is a critical aspect of your skills plan. If required, as we said, or if it makes sense to apply for your CETA grants, make sure that your CPD framework is in place. And in this space, so important that you keep all of your training documents. It is critical that your internal registers and so on are meticulous, as this will be a really important part of your process going forward. From a procurement perspective, identify strategic suppliers and implement your procurement plan as soon as possible. And this talks to the double accounting that we spoke about, with working with 51% Black-owned businesses as an example that are QSEs, that are really important people in the functioning of your business, who through partnerships are going to make you a more competitive business. Then looking at your enterprise and supplier development beneficiaries and having a plan where you really grow these people in your business and you recognize the role that they play in, again, building your competitiveness. And you guys can see the theme of this is all about making your business better. Lastly, who are your SED beneficiaries, and setting up an SED plan as soon as possible. Just with regard to your ESD and SED initiatives, what happens with a lot of people is that they spend the money at the last minute at the end of their financial year. But I'm not convinced that that's the best strategy. And the first reason for that is there's real merit in looking at amortizing your spend over multiple months. But secondly, if you're going to spend the money anyway, why not implement programs that make sense, that build the business, and that you get the benefit of that spend as early as possible, rather than just spending at the last minute and spending your money on whatever's needed. So really, guys, I guess that sums up the intention of this program, and that is be deliberate, understand what you are wanting to achieve, and then put the framework and the structure in place that ensures that your BE process is a positive experience. And so from my side, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. And I know that when we wrap up and probably during the question and answer session, you'll be able to provide guidance again, because I see there's a lot of questions in our chat boxes. But without further, and thank you so much to all the speakers today who have presented, and sincerest apologies for those who were kicked out. But I know that the message, the presentation was covered as well as on your behalf. But I think, colleagues, let's jump right into the questions to allow us time to really engage, unpack, clarify to everybody who's on this forum this morning. And one of the questions that I believe this was posed earlier on in the presentation, and that is, what constitutes a valid certificate? And I would like someone from my team, and I'm going to put Advocate Bbbee on the spot to answer this question. And then what I will do, colleagues, is I will then take questions on the chat boxes, and then we'll ask the speakers, the presenters, to answer them as I present or pose the questions. So the first one is, what is a valid BEE certificate? Deborah, please come in.
Thank you, CEO. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to everyone for the presentations. It's certainly been very helpful for all of us. And certainly it brings us to the question that you have proposed, CEO, and I think which is in everyone's minds. I think we need to look at the question quite obviously of whether a compliant BEE certificate and a valid BEE certificate are synonymous for the purposes of our legislation. And in making that decision as an authority, I think we've looked particularly at the fact that both the BEE legislation as well as our legislation requires a valid BEE certificate. Now, if that validity did not encompass compliance, then obviously it would defeat all the objects of the Act as well as the purposes of both the BEE legislation as well as our own, and particularly given the fact that our own legislation specifically identifies transformation as one of those objects of the Act as well as our reason for being. So certainly looking at it from that point of view, our view has been as the authority that compliance is part of validity for purposes of this part of the legislation, both the BEE legislation as well as our own. And if we look at the interpretation of validity as including compliance, I think we find that the interpretation of statutes in general and the principles which govern it do give us some indication and some direction in this regard. And we can think of a number of examples where to have something that's valid is one thing, but whether it's compliant or not is the crux of having a valid document, whether it's a valid driver's license, whether it's a valid anything else. And perhaps I can use the example of a driver's license. If, for example, I have a valid driver's license that's been issued by the correct authority, it's stamped, it's still valid in terms of the time periods, but it has been suspended or blocked or removed from operation by a court or by some sort of a court order, or by some sort of a police statute or something like that, then obviously my driver's license may still be valid, but it's not compliant and it doesn't allow me to drive on the road. And I think, you know, when we get to splitting straws, we end up with that kind of absurd situation. So I think we need to look here particularly at the fact that what are the objects and the purposes of the two legislations that we're dealing with, and what is an interpretation thereof in line with the interpretation of statute principles, which does not lead to some sort of an absurd situation. And for me and for us as an authority, our view has been that we cannot interpret it a valid certificate in any other way but to say that it must be one that is compliant. And that's our view on the matter. Obviously, there may be need for further discussion, but certainly from our point of view as the authority, I think that's the decision that we have made. Thank you, CEO. I don't know if that helps with the answer.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Is there anybody from one of the speakers or the PPRA daily? Do you have anything that you'd like to add on before I move on? So silence is golden. So I think that one answers that question around what is a valid BEE certificate. One of the questions from one of the practitioners on this forum, Ursula, she asks, and I think Chris, you can take that one. As a sole proprietor of a company and a woman, do I need a BEE partner? If we can ask
that one. Thank you. In this instance, as a sole proprietor, you are automatically excluded from the need to have a BEE certificate. And that's very much in the nature of what your business is about. And if you'd like to explore that a little bit more, there is a legislation 41.20. I'll actually bring it up as part of the question and answer that you can read it quickly. So yeah, nice to know that there's no immediate need to bring in a partner unless it has a strategic reason for you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that. And I know the other questions were just around, you know, people wanting a recording. So we will ensure that this is done at the end of our presentation. And one other question was, to qualify as an EME, must your turnover be less than 10 million or must it be less than 2.5 million?
I'll just jump into that as well and just say, always keep in mind what is the primary focus of your business. If you are a service-based business, the threshold is 10 million. And if you're the estate agent, broker, and so on, the threshold is 2.5 million. And that is turnover.
Okay, thank you for that. And if I can just have colleagues assist some of the presenters, some of the questions that I may have missed because I'm scrolling up all the questions. Naledi, do you want to maybe read out some that the team can unpack?
Okay, CEO, let me just check here on the chat. There's a hand as well. I don't know if I should unmute those who are raising their hands. Oh.
Please do. Please do.
Franklin, let me unmute him now. Franklin, you can ask your questions. Please unmute yourself.
Morning, it's Franklin Mawila. I'm clear with the other things. I just have some few clarity-seeking question on the following for Fidelity Fund Certificate, because they said, I think in 2022, they said there will be another law coming in. And then the other one,
you're breaking. He's breaking. There's no any other hand. Let me check the questions on the chat so that I can tell the meeting.
previously it only required that you only work 1 year, and they just want to understand with that one that forward and the certificate will. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Yes, and also to find out if you obtain that Fidelity Fund certificate, for how long does it last, and when must you renew it in terms of this regulation and licensing by the PPRA, and also that if they say you must write the exam, like obtaining the materials and maybe writing it online and all that. Yeah, so that's the clarity seeking question that I want to understand.
Thank you for that, Franklin. Delhi, do you want to take that one, please? But before Delhi comes in, so Franklin, remember under the old dispensation, the Estate Agency Affairs Act, or the erstwhile EAB, your FFC was only for 1 year, right? So every year you'd need to renew. But now under the PPA, that FFC that you have from 2022 is valid for 3 years. So it's not a new law. Actually, the PPA came into effect just a little over 2 years ago. And that's what we have been, as the regulator, trying to implement, or doing our best to implement this new legislation. I don't know if that clarifies your question, Franklin. Okay. And Chris and other speakers, there is a question around how do we claim for points? And same Saron as well wanted to just get an understanding, because she says, or he says, that the verification agency does not ask for this as they look at the financials.
Hi, Delhi, you are on mute. You can come in.
Thank you. I think the CEO has answered that question, which was in relation to how long does the FFC, how long is it valid, which is 3 years, and the renewal period is therefore from July to October. Hope that is clear. Towards the end of the 3 years, the renewal period is July to October. Anything after October, then you start accruing penalties. And in terms of the educational material, you can send an email to our education department, and then they will be able to give you the amount of or the cost of the education material, and how then you can access it once you have paid for the material. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Delhi. There's another question. Can you clarify the difference between service and estate agent? Delhi, did you hear me? I don't know. Can you hear me?
No. Chris, I think this one is for you. I think they just need clarification of what is a service-based and an estate agent question.
So at this point, I think the key is defined by the nature of your business and what your primary focus is. And so I don't want to get too caught up into the detail of the specifics, because I'm not a property expert in my own right around that detail. But the estate agent is basically somebody who would buy and sell the business. The service business is somebody who offers a service into the space. So I would imagine, for example, financing or something in that light. Perhaps, Jana, you can step in.
Hi, Frans. I'm just going to introduce my colleague, Frans, that will be assisting with this.
Hi, good day, Chris. In terms of the differences, every agency that we do a verification on will obviously have to claim whether they fall under services or whether they fall under estate agents. Every agency obviously knows the principle of their business. If they are estate agents in the sense of selling of businesses, like you said, selling of properties, or in the business of renting out properties, gaining the funds from the renters on behalf of the owner of the business. That, in my sense, would be services. And I think there's a very wide scope in terms of what's required. If you have a look in the property sector codes, under each sector code, there's a scope which indicates which businesses fall under which scope, if it's services or whether it's estate agents. And I think that needs to be followed by every agency before they actually attempt to apply for verification, so that they would know which scorecard they would fall under and appropriately prepare themselves. So in the Codes of Good Practice, property sector amended code, they will find the scope, and under the scope, they can see the classification for their businesses as well.
Thank you for that, Franz.
CEO, there's a hand from Nadia. I did unmute her. Can she ask?
Okay. Yes, please.
I am not 100% sure. I couldn't hear very well, but where do we need to go and look whether we must start with a compliancy program? I'm not sure yet, because Mr. Leroux mentioned something about in the beginning that we are a 65% small firms based industry. So does this mean that all small businesses now must become BEE compliant if you have a turnover over 2.5 million, then you have to reach a level 8? Or how do we know, or where do we go to figure out where we rely with in terms of becoming or having to be compliant or being exempt, etc.? I'm not 100% clear on that.
Thank you, Nadia. Deli, do you want to take a stab at this one? And then we'll have Chris come in and tell us where do they go? Or either way, Chris, can you just tell Nadia where do you go to see where do you fall in? And then the PPRA will say who needs to be compliant. Thank you, Chris.
Deli, do you want to go first? So just while we, excuse me, are we waiting for Deli just to come in? The essence, Nadia, is for you to look at your own business. And without knowing the detail of how your business is structured, it's very difficult for me to answer outright. But as a start, you can reach out to any verification agency. You should be able to look at your business and understand what those compliance requirements are. And from there, excuse me, and from there to make a decision as to what your next steps are. So I would start off by just understanding the requirements against the BEE framework, and that would be any verification agency or consultant for that matter.
Thank you for that, Chris. So Nadia, just to answer the second leg of the question, every real estate firm or principal, when they're registering, are supposed to be compliant, right? And produce a compliant BEE certificate. And in the beginning of my presentations, I did say that Lisbeth is here from registration and licensing, who I've asked that they just, together with this presentation, will attach what needs to be produced for new registrations. And I believe you would fall under the renewals cohort. So this will only be applicable to you at the renewal stage, which is in 2025. Thank you. Chris, there's another question around from Madzi. She's asking, is a CIPC issued BEE certificate considered as valid, and does it form part of this verification? So I don't know if it's your team or Yana's team who will be able to assist in answering this one.
From our side, in terms of the allowable CIPC certificates that gets issued, it is a valid BEE certificate. That's obviously issued for EME companies, and every EME company has the opportunity to log into CRPC and do your own BE certificate. It's a CRPC certificate. It will not have a SANAS logo on it, but for EME companies, that is acceptable, and they can use those certificates instead of an affidavit. It does hold exactly the same weight as those exempted affidavits do, but a lot of times companies would request that their suppliers do the CRPC certificate instead of the affidavit, but that holds exactly the same weight, and it is a valid BE representation.
Thank you for that. Naledi, I can't see if there's any hands before I jump into the next question. Are there any hands?
There's no hands for now, CEO. There's no hands.
Okay. And then a question from Tasman. Does an agency just need to have a BEE certificate, or is any level that is required? So I think what she's asking is that, does there need to be a level associated with a BEE certificate? And I think let me take a stab at it. So in our presentation, Tasman, we said that the certificate just has to be compliant. So you will need to issue the regulator with a compliant BEE certificate. I hope that clarifies your question. And I don't know if there are any other questions, Naledi, that I did not see or I'm missing, and if colleagues can also jump in, please.
There's another question from Sylvia. It says 2.5 million. Where do I fall under? Okay, let me see. Okay, no, sorry. It starts on, I'm a sole owner and principal of my own estate agency. I do not have any agents, neither admin, not earning. 2.5 million. Where do I fall under? I think it's two separate messages, but I think it's one question.
Just in terms of the turnover mentioned and being a sole proprietor, that would classify, obviously, depending if you fall under estate agents or service providers. Under estate agents, that would obviously give you the EME status, and you can then obviously get the CRPC certificate or the affidavit template that can be completed.
Thank you for that answer. And maybe can we also take the one by Yvette Ferreira? She says that an agency with her agency turnover is 3.4 million. She is listed as a company. She is a woman, but with a colored partner. I am only the active director with one wage, like she's the only one who gets a salary, but then also employs Black staff on a casual basis. So I guess she wants to understand whether she meets the BEE requirements. Yvette, if I'm not capturing your question correctly, please just put up your hand and then clarify your ask.
Okay, let me unmute her. Okay, because I have two hands from Sunette and Stefan. Okay, let me unmute them.
So we'll take those after Yvette. If you can just clarify your ask, please. Thank you.
Okay, I unmuted Sunette. I'm struggling to find Yvette's username.
Okay, Sunette, please come in.
Hello. Okay, I'm trying to get a straight answer, but maybe I'm not listening very well, or maybe I'm not understanding. If you're a private company, your turnover is over 2.5 million. I'm a 100% white women-owned company. What is the minimum level that I need to be on the BEE certificate? If it says non-compliant, will my certificate still be valid, or do I have to have a minimum level on the BBE certificate?
Thank you, Sunette. Chris, you want to take that one as a white woman? 100%
Thank you, Sunette.
owned. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunette. Just based on what the other panelists were saying, your non-compliance certificate will not be sufficient for your application of the FFC. You need to have a minimum level 8 on your certificate to go for it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sunette, for your question.
Thank you.
Let me just see on the chat if we have another question. What level should you be? Okay, it was answered, Sunette. Please send presentation. Okay, we will send. Let me see the chat now. When will PPRA clamp down on non-compliance BE-owned companies trading under radar illegally? Let me see if there's another question for PPRA. It says, what about CC companies? It only says that. And the other ones were answered. And the other ones is comments. Okay, there's another question from Babs. I would like to know about the PDE exemption. That can be the agent exempted. And then it goes, when the FFC was issued after July 2008, due to the EAB was slow to issue the FFC in time. Babs, can I unmute you? Maybe you ask your questions properly so that the meeting can answer you. For now, I will unmute. I see a hand from Stefan. Stefan, I will unmute you so you ask your question. Stefan, come in and ask your question. Stefan? Okay, maybe he's struggling. Babs, Babs, maybe you can ask your question. You can unmute yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Ma'am, what I would like to understand, the EAAB was so slowly to issue FFCs around 2005, 2008, up to I don't know up until when, because people still are struggling to receive their FFCs in time. Then the PDE, it says after July 9, 2008, you cannot be exempted, of which if you pay in time, and then the certificate was issued after July 2008, can't you be exempted on that? That is my question.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Babs. I'll answer this in this manner. I will write my email address in the chat so that I can be able to answer your specific questions, because I'll have to look at the facts, right? And also pull you up on the system. But I do know that as far as FFCs are being issued, that's something that as a regulator we've been intentional about and clearing our backlog, which we've been able to do thus far. Especially now that we're approaching the end of the financial year. And then with the PDE, again, I know there are colleagues on this forum from the Education, Training and Professionalization Business Unit. So send me an email, Ms. Babs, and then I will do commit to responding today after looking at your particular matter, so that I don't answer just in a blanket approach. Thank you.
What is your email address, ma'am?
I'm going to email it now in the chat, Ms. Babs.
Okay.
I'll write it in the chat box. Yes, thank you.
Program Director, this is Stephen.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephen, please come in.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Acting CEO. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to check something. Firstly, Jan Leroux made reference to 60% of the industry being, his words, mom and pops. I'm not sure if that included those licensees within the bigger brands that are obviously also owner-managed businesses, but be this as it may, I just want to get clarity on one matter, if I may, for myself and my colleagues. We all understand the concept of BEE, and I have no issue in that regard. Let me state that publicly. However, I just want to check. The normal code for an emerging microentity is obviously set at 10 million turnover, and therefore on that basis you can self-certify or use the CIPC equivalency of the certificate. My understanding is that does not apply. I just want to get absolute confirmation from whoever spoke just now. That does not apply to us because you've set the limit at 2.5. Is that correct?
Sorry, Stephen, just confirm quickly, the turnover 2.5, is that for in your industry as an estate agent?
Yes, I'm an estate agent. I'm an EME. Under normal circumstances, my BEE would be level 4 if I had turnover of under 10. I could self-certify and get BEE 4 for self-certification. But from what I understand here, the PPRA or the PPA has decided that that level is set at 2.5, which means that most of us on this call, hopefully, I'm saying have a turnover in excess of 2.5, and therefore most of us on this call will have to get certified by one of the agencies and cannot do self-certification.
That's correct. If your turnover exceeds the thresholds that they provided you for an E&E status, and then you fall over to a QEC status, unfortunately, you will have to go through the rating process if you do not qualify with the appropriate black ownership percentage to allow you the automatic representation of a level 1 or level 2 depending on ownership of the company. But the moment that you exceed the EME thresholds, you do fall in with QEC thresholds, and then you have to apply by the QEC requirements.
And confirm that the PPA has decided that that threshold is 2.5, not 10, as is applicable to every other industry in the country.
I'll leave the question over to Delhi or Thato, and I'll let them address that, as it's a question directly directed to the question, the requirements from the PPRA.
Thank you. I think that is not what the PPRA has decided on, but that is what is decided on by the legislation. And I think Chris did reflect the turnovers that are applicable, and we are aligning ourselves to the particular legislation.
Thanks, Stephen. So the link of the 2.5 million is not defined in the Act or by the PPRA directly. It was an industry collective process that ultimately resulted in the gazetting of the property transformation codes. And the codes in effect guide the BEE process and the verification agencies. So that's important. The second thing just to emphasize is that what Frans was mentioning around black ownership and your automatic exemption and getting a level 4 or level 2 or level 1 for that matter, is that any QSE business that has a 51% or more black ownership is automatically recognized as a level 2 as a QSE, and it's an EME, and any business that is 100% black owned is automatically recognized as a level 1 as a QSE. Obviously, for businesses that are black owned, that are generic businesses, they have to go through the verification process.
Thank you, for Chris. Naledi, are there hands, or can I continue to take a few?
Mr. Leroux wanted to come in. I didn't
Okay.
meet him.
Okay.
Hi, Delhi and CEO. Thanks very much. Just for the record, in case there's some misunderstanding, from Reboza's side, our record is clear. We're very pro-transformation. My question was more on the scorecard, and that we do have some difficulty with. Also, there was a gentleman asking earlier on the 65% threshold or market share. No, it's the big brands together, all their franchisees, all their offices, all their brands together claim a 35% market share, which I've confirmed with banks and mortgage originators. So the 65% would be the smaller firms. And I'm not saying they're all mom and pops. They could be sole proprietors. They could be medium-sized companies. I still want to take issue with Deborah's answer, though, about the validity of a certificate. I'm not clear on that, because if you now get a certificate from a verification agency that says non-compliant, and you've paid for that certificate and it was done properly, I'm arguing it is a valid certificate. It's just a non-compliant certificate. I think that difference does exist. So I just want to put on record that we don't agree with that. Also, Deborah did not respond on how many certificates were issued last year that therefore were issued on non-compliant BEE certificates. And I really think that needs to be addressed, because that's the difficulty I'm raising with especially smaller companies. I'm not saying bigger companies don't have this issue, but smaller companies definitely do. And I was also hoping, I don't know if there's still time left, if maybe Chris can help. You know, if we look at all the elements, there are so many that especially smaller companies just cannot possibly comply with. The only option I think a smaller company really has is on skills development, enterprise and supplier development, and socioeconomic development. The rest, if you're a one-man band, for example, to take the lady's question earlier, single white woman, she's not employing anyone. She cannot possibly qualify to get to a 40-point market as far as I can see it. So I hope you can throw some light on that, Chris, if that's possible. It would help.
Thank you, CEO. I think the question of the PPRA having in the past received or not received BEE certificates, the point, and I think it was mentioned when we started, that everyone, when the legislation was implemented, was not ready. We did sympathize with property practitioners who did not have BEE certificates at the time, but we made it a point to state that when they do renew, and also in 2024, we will be requiring a BEE certificate. So we do feel that we have given enough time for companies to try and rectify the situation of the BEE certificate. We might not be able to give you the number, Jan, of how many companies registered with a non-compliant certificate. Because at that time we were just trying to ensure that people are aware of the fact that the BEE certificate compliance is a requirement, and going forward we will need a valid BEE certificate. So we hope that people have had enough time to get their house in order, and that is why now we are coming back to industry and saying we now require a compliant BEE certificate. I don't know if that answers it, but we do have companies that submitted compliant BEE certificate. We can't give the numbers here, but we can give it if in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Just as a quick answer to your question about the different elements, we did state earlier that companies that are operating as a sole proprietor are exempt from the process. And so when it comes to the individual circumstances of the business, you know, obviously this is a forum we can't go into detail because we don't know those circumstances, but ownership is certainly possible. Management with a team of more than one is possible. Procurement and so on is possible. So the suggestion would be rather to reach out to a verification agency or to a consultant so that we can, well, whoever it is can help with an assessment and doing the gap analysis that we spoke about earlier, and then looking at what is possible and how to put a strategy in place to ensure that compliance is possible.
Okay, thank you. I have a hands, CEO. Can I unmute admin?
Not a problem. Proceed.
Okay,
Hi, how are you?
We're good, and you?
Good. Okay, so I have a question. So we have a firm and we were told that we have to be like a level 4. We're currently a level 8. And because the threshold is so high, but most of the funds goes to the agent, the company only keeps 30%. So we did explain that to our verification agency that, look, this money is in and out. It's coming into our account, but we don't keep it. So we shouldn't be like meeting the mark for the businesses over 10 million when we don't even keep those funds.
So, what's your name? Question?
So the question is, why can't we be in the threshold for the amount that the company keeps only, not the whole turnover, because we don't keep that amount?
Thank you. I don't know, Yana, if you can take that one, because we the one related to the threshold, Yana.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yana,
Yes. It's difficult to comment in this regard. And I don't want to set parameters or whatever, but we would prefer to have a look at those financials and to understand and interpret it correctly. So, I'm not going to comment on that one now. I don't know, Frans, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, in principle, if it's obviously we're not going to give opinion yet, because the fact is every company is a little bit different and everyone's financial statements are set up a little bit differently as well. If your auditor has indicated revenue in the company as a certain amount, then obviously that is the revenue amount that gets used by the verification agency, unless that same auditor then clarifies that the amount that you indicated is an in and out, does not form part of the revenue of the business, and he gives reasons why, valid financial reasons why, then obviously there's something that can be considered by the verification agency. It's very difficult for us to say. We don't know the financial statements of the company or the processes of their procurement services going through the business. But it is a possibility. But again, it all depends on what is classified as revenue in terms of financial requirements. So if your auditor says that it's not revenue and it's supposed to be indicated as an income or anything like that, then the auditor will have to give that clarification and that report to the verification agency before they can consider it. So my suggestion would be is maybe taking that route first, contacting the auditor, and then seeing if they would be prepared to engage with you regarding that, and then approaching your verification agency and getting that amended and getting that fixed for you guys.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just also to answer your question, remember we did say that for purposes of applying for the FFC, level 8 is acceptable for us as the PPRA.
But I think like in our where we're coming from is that we cannot afford to do all these things to be compliant when we only keep in a small percentage of the funds. So that's basically where we're coming from.
And I think for questions, right, that company specific, there are colleagues who presented earlier, and their emails are cited and their numbers as well. I don't think they'll have a problem with you just liaising with them directly so that they can look at your, your particular organization, if that's okay, if we can conclude on this question in that manner. But thank you. And I don't know if there's any hands, but there is a question, Chris and Yana and team, around, they were hoping that we will explain the allocation of percentages when completing an exemption affidavit. I know we didn't touch on it. I don't know if we can, just at high level, before I conclude.
Just want to clarify the question in terms of the percentages when doing an EME affidavit. What exactly is meant by the percentages? Is that the percentage of the black ownership indicated on the affidavit, or the requirements for what your black ownership must be in order for you to be able to do an affidavit if you're an EME or QEC for your levels?
Musa, do you want to just clarify your question? Because all it says is, I was hoping that you will explain the allocation of percentages when completing an exemption affidavit. Musa, are you still with us?
Let me try to unmute him. There was a hand that came before Musa. Dennis, you can unmute yourself while I find Musa to unmute.
Just to clarify on that quickly, while you guys are busy finding Musa, is that if you are an EME and you've got 51% black ownership, you automatically qualify as a level 2. So that must be 51% black ownership. If you've got 100% black ownership, you automatically qualify as a level 1. So those are the percentages, whether you're an EME or a QSE. But in terms of the percentages, it has to be 51% or 100% for the level 2 or level 1. Anything under 50% gives you an automatic level 4, unless you're a QEC. If you're a QEC with less than 51% black ownership, you cannot do the affidavit, and you actually have to go through a verification process.
Okay. Musa, jump in.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. Yes, it's unfortunate I don't have that affidavit with me now, but there's a part there underneath where you have to allocate certain percentages. If I remember well, with regards to, it talks about the number of youth that is unemployed, not attending any education, something like that. You allocate percentage. It talks about, I think there's 3-4 parts there. I can't remember very well. So it's confusing. Like I just want to make an example in my case. I will understand. Let's say you are a director, sole director, black ownership, full black ownership. I believe that on that part you will fall under level 1. But where it's confusing is where you have to complete that part underneath.
Okay, Musa, what you're referring to there, it sounds to me that you're referring to the breakdown for the designated group status of the company, where they talk about youth, the military veterans, that type of stuff. So that section of the affidavit, if you're 100% black owned, it does ask you what is your black female representation in the business as well. And then it goes further and asks what is your designated group status. That means that they have a look at the breakdown of the black ownership, or what percentage of the black ownership is youth, for example, or people living in rural areas. So you have to look at what percentage of your black ownership qualifies for those percents. If nothing qualifies, then obviously you're going to put in 0% there. That doesn't have an effect on the validity of your certificate or the level that you achieve. That's just an additional recognition in terms of designated group status of the business that your customers then can use when they're rating their procurement element. They get additional points if your company is 51% designated group. But like I said, then you have to have a look at the breakdown of the owners of the company, the shareholders of the company, how many of them are youth, rural, that type of stuff. So that's where you put in those percentages. But if you don't have anything that qualifies, you just leave that blank and then just fill in the normal black ownership.
Thank you, Musa. I suggest, or I hope that covers your question. But colleagues, the question that we did not take today was only the beginning of this journey, and hence the timing of this was so critical, because we did not want to introduce this topic a month before renewals, and then we have disagreements. So this is an ongoing conversation. Like I had alluded earlier, the speakers here today, they're here to take whatever questions that you may have in the future for that are clarity seeking, or whether you require guidance. But let me take this opportunity to thank everyone who has logged in today to participate in this webinar, and also acknowledge our speakers who contributed to this day: Jan, Nicole, Yana, Chris, Adrian, as well as Sia and Deli, for participating in this very important webinar. I also just wanted to say, we also always need to ask ourselves, what was the purpose of this legislation? What was the purpose of lawmakers repealing the Estate Agency Affairs Act and introducing the Property Practitioners Act? The purpose of BEE is to give impetus and support for the socio-economic change needed in this country. And the reason for including BEE in the PPAA is to achieve exactly that in the sector that we love so much, in our property sector. And I want to challenge each and every one of us, and everyone on this forum, and everyone who will get this presentation, just to go and look at the preamble, right, of this legislation. If you look at it, you'll see that out of the 9 points, only 1 references the regulation, but 8 points out of the 9, that's over 90%, if my mathematics serves me correctly, they are about transformation. And in my opening remarks, I did say that transformation is one of the 3 pillars that we rest on. And it is our duty as the regulator, as the sector as a whole, that we really do start giving transformation feet and we start mobilizing it. And what brings me comfort, the opening remarks by the CEO of Rebosa, Mr. Jan Leroux, when he said that the industry is very pro-transformation. And that to me says that we are not transforming alone as the regulator, but we've got the backing of the industry to really implement this mandate that is before us, and we implement the legislation that is before us. And on that note, colleagues, I want to thank you once more. And this is not the end. We welcome your questions, your clarity-seeking questions, and my team and I will collate all the questions that were posed, and we will answer them. And this presentation will be shared with everyone who has attended, as well as on the website as well. So thank you so much for attending. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.